And it's my honor to serve along with Sherry Bustos and David Cicilline as one of three co-chairs of the Democratic Policy and Communications Committee. I'm thankful, first of all, for the leadership of Nancy Pelosi during these incredibly challenging times, which have been steadfast and consistent and firm in upholding the great values of the United States of America. I'm also thankful for the presence of Congresswoman Betty McCollum, who has introduced an incredibly important piece of legislation for our veterans and for the men and women who serve in our military. I'm also incredibly thankful for the presence of four individuals who served this country with distinction as individuals who worked in the armed forces and now serve this country with distinction as individuals in the United States Congress, who we will hear from shortly. This is day 3 of a government shutdown encouraged and inspired by Donald Trump and his co-conspirators in the Republican-led Congress. It's unfortunate for the American people that Republicans do two things well: cut taxes for millionaires and billionaires and shut down government. It was Republicans who shut down government twice in 1995. Republicans who shut down government once in 1996. Republicans who shut down government for 16 days in October of 2013. Last year, it was the Republican president, Donald Trump, who said, what this country needs is a good shutdown. And this year, the Republican-controlled Congress obliged. Now, the Republicans control the House, the Senate, and the presidency. It is their responsibility to pass a budget and enact a responsible spending bill that keeps the lights on, government functioning, and America moving forward. They have failed in that basic responsibility. Now, Democrats stand ready, willing, and able to work with our colleagues on the other side of the aisle to reopen government and to keep the country moving forward. But we need partners who are willing to work with us in a responsible fashion. And it's important to simply note that governing by continuing resolution is irresponsible for our country, irresponsible for our economy, and irresponsible for the military. That's not just the House Democratic position. That is the position of Donald Trump's Defense Secretary, General Mattis, who testified before Congress and when asked about operating the world's greatest military by continuing resolution, said, and I quote, "It just creates unpredictability. It makes us rigid. We cannot deal with new and revealing threats. We know our enemies are not standing still, so it's about as unwise as can be." Other high-ranking members of the military have made similar points over and over and over again. So as we are in the midst of the chaos, crisis, and confusion that has been the Trump presidency since day one, it seems to us that at minimum, we can put the men and women of the armed forces and the veterans who have served this nation above partisan politics and make sure they can continue to be paid and can continue to get the services that they have earned and deserve to continue to live out their lives with grace and dignity. That's why the legislation that Congresswoman McCollum has introduced is so important. And so it's now my honor and privilege to yield to someone who has been an incredible champion for the military, an incredible champion for veterans, a senior member of the Appropriations Committee, and the author of this important piece of legislation, Congresswoman Betty McCollum.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jeffries. As was pointed out, I serve on appropriations, and I serve on the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee. So I, too, hear directly from our military leaders on a regular basis about the damaging effects of operating under these short-term continuing resolutions and the effects that they particularly have on our military. And as was pointed out, that's the reason why we're in this shutdown, because Republicans in Congress and President Trump haven't worked in good faith on a long-term budget agreement for our national security and for our domestic priorities. They wasted an entire year on their disastrous Trump care. They took health care away from millions of Americans, and then they worked on their tax scam, a giveaway to billionaires. That was a Republican priority, not funding our government. And now, President Trump has acknowledged himself that our active duty military will be among the millions of federal employees who will be working without pay. I grew up in a military family, and I understand the sacrifices our service members and their families make while they're deployed and then when they return home. And it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or if you're a Republican. I believe we can all agree that it's wrong to ask our servicemen and women in uniform to put their lives on the line without pay. And that's why I introduced the Pay Our Military Act of 2018. The bill provides both pay and death benefits for our service members during this government shutdown. It includes pay and support for the Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, and Coast Guard. And should one of our servicemen or women make the ultimate sacrifice during this shutdown, this bill ensures that our military families will be taken care of promptly by our country. And I believe that's the least we can do. That's also what we've done in the past. In 2013, Democrats and Republicans came together to pass similar legislation unanimously in 2013. But unfortunately, when I offered a motion to bring this bill up on Saturday, Republicans defeated it on a party line vote. In the Senate, Leader McConnell prevented Senator McCaskill from offering the same bill. She was even prevented from offering it. And today we are entering the first week of the Trump shutdown, and we are beginning to feel the real effects that this Republican-inflicted shutdown will have on the American people. It's time for President Trump and Republicans to end the chaos, work in good faith on an agreement that provides long-term budget certainty and addresses our urgent needs. And I hope Republicans will do that. But even if they won't, they shouldn't be stopping us from being able to ensure that our men and women in the uniform, active duty, and I would add reservists and the National Guard, not be punished for their failure to govern responsibly. So let's pay our troops. Let's get an agreed upon top line number. Let's reopen the government, and let's get our work done. And I just want to publicly acknowledge that we have lost 2 members of the armed services, and our federal government is not rushing to be with their families to take care of their time of need. It is the Fisher House. So I know that the men and women of our military, along with their families, thank the Fisher House for doing what our federal government failed to do. And with that, I would like to introduce one of my brothers from Minnesota who served honorably in our military, and like so many of our servicemen and women when they come home, continue to serve. Representative Tim Walz from Minnesota.
Thanks, Betty. Well, thank you all for being here this morning. I wish you wouldn't have to be, and we could do the work we need to. I'd like to thank Representative McCollum, someone who does know what it's like to live in a military family, moving from post to post, and understanding the certainty of that paycheck matters. It matters to making sure kids get the education they need, they're able to pay the bills and move on. So it's a smart piece of legislation. Should have easily been passed and taken that off the table so that we could deal with the pressing issues of a long-term budget, but it was not, because it was about messaging. And I'd like to thank Representative Jeffrey Cicilline and Bustos for being here. Their title is about getting the truth to the American public, not alternative facts, not an alternative universe, not political spinning, but to tell the facts where they are in statements that were been made. To my brothers in arms who are here, thank you for your service and your voice. And to Leader Pelosi, I think 2018 marks what I believe is the 15th year of the Leader instituted a Veterans Roundtable that's attended by all of this nation's veteran service organizations, the American Legion, the VFW, the Disabled American veterans, Gold Star wives, Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, Vietnam veterans, and those are held every quarterly. And they are an intense conversation about what are the needs to fulfill what needs to be done to veterans. And that organizations, each of those organizations, understand that what came out of that is a modernization of the GI Bill, better benefits, and this understanding that all Americans want to get that right. They know who stands on their side, and they know who instituted that. So I want to thank the leader. Having served 24 years in the military, I also have what I consider to be the responsibility of, I retired as a command sergeant major, the highest ranking enlisted personnel to ever serve in the United States Congress. And for those folks who are here, they understand that the role of the sergeant major is to ensure the well-being of those service members and their families. Nothing is more important than that. That is the role that you carry out. And during this time, these are folks that are downrange. Their families are here. They're serving us in combat zones. They're serving us in locations rearward, but providing for that mission. And this certainty matters to them. They have mortgages. They have kids that need to pay tuition. They have groceries that need to be purchased. And one of the things that has always been sacred, and it's proven true with what the leader did and what my Republican colleagues have done, we did not make the military and our veterans a political issue. And I'm just going to assume that the horrific statements made in front of our soldiers as a backdrop by the vice president were made out of ignorance of someone who never served a day in uniform, and choose to cross that line of politicizing what is not a political issue, of choosing to throw our service members into the middle of a fight that is not theirs, and the idea that there would somehow be a lack of commitment by those service members who are standing behind him. Many of them may consider themselves veterans, but they were professional enough to understand you don't cross that veil into the Hatch Act violation of politicizing an event with the military. So we stand here today to ask the president and the vice president to retract the remarks they made, to pull back and make the commitment that we can take this issue off the table. It has been proven time and time again in the Veterans Affairs Committee that we are a bipartisan committee serving our veterans. We have deep differences, deep different ideological disagreements, but it has never crossed into that point. And so the piece of legislation that Ms. McCollum has brought up, that Ms. McCaskill brought up, are simply common sense ways to take that off the table. If there were a commitment to do this, and the vice president needs to be very clear, in 2013 he made it clear he was willing to shut the government down over women's access to health care. That was his threshold in that. And to stand in front of troops on foreign soil at a time of war and make those statements is beyond the pale. So I'm proud to stand here today with folks who understand this, maybe no more so than Captain Seth Moulton, a combat veteran himself who has been a leader in national security issues, has been a voice of reason, a voice of understanding, and a voice of bipartisanship on the security of this nation and the care of our warriors should never be thrust into the middle of a political fight like it was. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you Congressman from Massachusetts, Seth Moulton.
Tim, thank you very much. You know, when you're in the military, whether you're an officer, a captain, or you're the most junior enlisted, you look to the sergeant major to know what to do. And I can tell you that that's what our veterans do here in the House of Representatives. So thank you very much for your leadership. Another thing you know when you're in the Marines is that officers eat last. And it's long past time that our Republican leadership here in Washington learned that lesson. Because here's what's on the line. The health and vibrancy of our economy, the day-to-day security of this nation, our national security, when this morning there are members of the Department of Defense showing up to work to fill out furlough forms because the government isn't funded. And on top of that, we're talking about taking care of our kids, providing them basic medical care, and giving dreamers a chance at the American dream, something that 9 out of 10 Americans believe they should have. There's no reason why you can't do all of these things. That's basic government functioning. And yet Republicans are telling us that we have to choose. Choose between these kids or those kids. Choose between paying our troops or getting basic health care for our children. It's reprehensible that Republican leaders in Congress have refused to even allow a vote on continuing to pay our military. And there will be far-reaching and detrimental consequences to continuing to budget crisis to crisis. Our troops deserve better. Our children deserve better. And the American people deserve better than this utter lack of leadership. One of the other things you learn in the military is that leaders are responsible. They take responsibility. And right now in Washington, it's Republicans who are driving the bus. Now, I don't like that, because I know that Donald Trump is in the driver's seat, and I think he's going to drive this bus off a cliff. But right now, he's just simply let the bus run out of gas. And you can point a lot of fingers on a bus when it runs out of gas, but everybody knows it's the driver's fault. So it's time that Republican leaders in Washington take that basic level of responsibility for the leadership positions that the American people have given them and get this government back to work. And with that, I am honored to introduce a new member of the House Democratic Caucus, a fellow veteran and someone I am so proud to serve with here, Congressman Anthony Brown.
Thanks, Seth. Thanks, Seth. And I want to thank Captain Moulton, Command Sergeant Major Tim Waltz, and Captain Panetta. Thank you for your service, both in uniform. Lieutenant.
Navy, Lieutenant.
Oh, okay, Lieutenant. Okay. Thank you for your service, both in uniform and in the United States House of Representatives. I want to thank my colleagues who are here today. And most importantly, I really do want to thank Leader Pelosi. Thank you for your commitment to national security, your commitment to the war fighters, your commitment to the men and women who have taken off the uniform and have taken on veteran status, and your support to their families. Today is day 3 of a Republican-driven shutdown. A shutdown caused because Republicans are unwilling to negotiate, agree, even have meaningful conversations about the priorities of the American people, whether it's fighting the opioid epidemic, whether it's funding veterans' health care, whether it's a more robust assistance for disaster relief from communities from the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, California, Texas, or Florida, or whether it's protecting immigrants. And yes, it's their unwillingness to sit down and have meaningful discussions about long-term funding for our national security. Today, more than 1 million American fighting men and women are waking up today to perform their mission. There are sailors on the deck of Navy destroyers somewhere in the Indian Ocean. There are special operators waking up in Syria and Afghanistan and Africa. There are airmen who are waking up on airfields on the Korean Peninsula and in Afghanistan, willing to do their mission, ready to do their mission, focusing not only on their mission success, but their own survival and the survival of the men and women with whom they serve, so that together they can complete their mission and return home safely to the families that they love and the communities that they defend. But this government shutdown has made their job that much more difficult, because in addition to focusing on their mission, they are now burdened with the question, will my family be able to pay the mortgage? Or are you going to be able to pay the heating bill when that arrives in the mail? We're going to be able to put groceries on the table. These are the burdens that men and women in uniform are now faced with because of this avoidable government shutdown. The shutdown is going to impact reservists who are now in the forced generation cycle, ready to deploy somewhere in harm's way to do difficult things that fewer and fewer Americans are willing and ready to do. But the training for those reservists have come to a grinding halt. The supports that warfighters rely on, like the civilians at the National Maritime Intelligence Service in my district in Maryland, or the Defense Information Systems Agency, again in Maryland, those important supports to the warfighters, they too come to a grinding halt. We have placed an extraordinary burden on our warfighters who are doing very difficult things on our behalf. But this shutdown isn't the only threat that they face. They face another continuing resolution, the fourth in a series of kick the can down the road by Republicans who are unwilling to make difficult choices. And that's a long-term funding solution for national security. And when we talk about funding national security, it's not just military spending. It's that non-military defense, non-military spending that goes to the Department of State for diplomacy, USAID for development, because as General Mattis reminds us over and over again, he's written about it, he's spoken about it. The fewer dollars you put in State Department means the more dollars you have to put into bullets and ammunition. We want to fund our military, but not because we're tying our diplomats and our developers with one hand behind their back. So there's another threat that they face, and that's a continuing resolution. Pilots can't fly. Naval vessels that need repair won't be repaired in a time when the Navy is asking for more vessels. The inability to fund the next generation defense system, those are the systems that protect us in outer space and in cyberspace. Those are the systems that allow our warfighters to communicate on the battlefield, to defend, and to do the things that they need to do. In this ever-evolving technological battlefield, we can't hamstring our warfighter with a continuing resolution that inhibits us from improving and modernizing our force. General Mattis, Secretary Mattis stated, you've heard it said earlier today, that the greatest threat that our servicemen and women face in the field is not the threat of North Korea. It's not the threat of ISIS and other extremist groups. It's not the threat of an aggressive Russia. It's a continuing resolution. So now's the time for Republicans to join Democrats to agree to a long-term funding measure for national security, because a CR is not enough. And it's with that, I turn the podium back over to Mr. Jeffries.
Thank you, Congressman Brown. And before I turn the program over to our distinguished leader, let me just acknowledge the presence again formally of Congressman Jimmy Panetta, who served this nation ably in the armed forces and now is serving a congressional district in the great state of California. I also want to acknowledge the presence of Sheila Jackson-Lee, who serves on the Homeland Security Committee. And now it's my honor and privilege to turn it over for closing remarks and to open us up.
Just go to questions.
For questioning, okay.
Okay, Jimmy said he's going to take all the difficult.
Questions?
What do you guys think about the deal that's being talked about in the Senate, February 8th CR, and then move to an immigration bill over there, especially considering Ryan has seemingly refused to give any guarantee that they would bring that bill or any other bill up over here?
Well, thank you. I'm going to bring it back to the subject that brings us here as I answer your question. First of all, let me say how proud I am of all of our members and others who have served in the military as well. And we all take an oath to protect and defend. That first responsibility we have is to protect the American people. I think everyone in the Congress has that as the highest priority. The fact, though, is that we have this challenge on the budget that is holding up some of that money to protect and defend. We support the initiatives that the Republicans have put forth for increasing our defense spending. What is the mission? What are your needs? We want to be there. So there isn't any question about that. What we do know, though, and I've visited scores of bases, installations, and posts around the world and in our country over the years. And many times when I go to the theater of war, the military will say to me, among the questions we'll receive, but always one question, what's going to happen when I go home? And as you know, the mantra of the military, on the battlefield, we leave no soldier behind. And when they come home, we say, we need no veteran behind. And part of the debate right now is, while we support the defense investments, we also need to have the domestic investments, some of which Captain? Colonel, oh my gosh. Colonel Brown mentioned. And that is veterans. You know, in our domestic budget, In our domestic budget, we have what the Colonel mentioned. We have Department of State, Department of Homeland Security, Department Anti-Terrorism Activities of the Justice Department. We have, did I say the State Department already? And Veterans Affairs. So what we're asking for is the parity that is required under the budget agreement for increase in defense, increase in domestic, recognizing that 1/3 of the domestic budget is a security function. But in addition to that, there are many other needs that our veterans need when they come home in terms of education and the rest that we have promised that we see as important and to the strength of our country. Our military might, certainly a definition of our strength, the health, education, and well-being of American people, essential to that strength. So this is what this is about, that the fact that, in some governments, if you don't pass a budget, the government falls. There is no reason why we could not have come together and said, these are the pillars of discussion, whether it's parity, pay-fors, dreamers, order. Of course, that second part is very small compared to the big investment debate that we are having. If there never had been a dreamer on the face of the earth, we would still be having this debate over our allocation of resources. If you ask me, I'll tell you why I think it's a problem, but I want to get back to your question. I don't see that there's any reason for, I'm speaking personally and hearing from my members, to support what was put forth. As I said, we have a plan. We said, let's put on the table what it is that we need to address, and not only put it on the table, but promise to put it on the floor for a vote. And now let's assign our appropriators the task of getting the bills written in the period of time. That's not what is in the Senate bill. I don't know what will come of it, but when it comes over here, I know there'll be a large number of our members who will not support it. And you know what? We're so close to agreement. It's almost if they don't want agreement. But again, the irresponsibility of shutting down government, our distinguished colleague, member of the messaging committee with Sherry Bustos and David Cicilline, mentioned how many times the Republicans have shut government down. We believe in governance. We want to keep government open. We want to hold it accountable. We want to be transparency in what we do, bipartisanship in our solutions, and bringing the country together. What I see on the Senate side does not look that way to me. Any of our colleagues want to address that?
Shannon, I'm from MedPage Today. I had a question, Congressman, about healthcare stakeholders. Have hospitals and physician groups responded to the shutdown, and what are they saying? Do they feel as strongly about the immigration issues as you all do?
Tim?
Let me say something about that, because here, I think it's really important, and I wouldn't have gone down this path, but you have. I think it's really important to note the following. On September 30th, the CHIP program expired. Over 120 days ago, the CHIP initiative expired. In the meantime, and of course at that time, the Republicans put a bill on the floor for CHIP that paid for it by taking money from other children's health initiatives, inoculations, lead poisoning, those kinds of things. Why should the children be paying for their children's health insurance program? We didn't even let corporations pay for anything when they got $1 trillion something tax rate. But anyway, taking it back to that. So all of a sudden, the Senate has decided CHIP, and they have on one of their split screen things, CHIP expires today. No, expired 120 days ago, and you didn't do anything about it. But you still aren't doing anything about it if you do CHIP and you don't do the full package, which is primary care doc medical education to care for these children, community health centers, which service 27 million Americans for their health care, including many of those, mostly all of those CHIP kids. So this thing that they put out there as you're going to shut down government by not voting for CHIP, no, you're shutting down government. But reminding, they never even had 50 votes on their own side to keep government open when they talk about 60 votes. They didn't even have 50 votes on their own side. And so when you talk about this, It's as if they decided, we know how we're going to shut down government. We're going to make them look like they're voting against children, and at the same time, they have in their split screen this number of people on kids on CHIP, this number of kids on DACA. The Democrats have chosen a lower number, those. This is not a Sophie's Choice. We are not a Sophie's Choice nation. We can keep our kids and healthy and safe, and we don't have to choose among them. And that is what they did in a very disingenuous way on that CHIP bill. But many of the groups and organizations that you have mentioned have been those who have joined with us in fighting their attempts to repeal the Affordable Care Act, and I think they have a very good idea as to who has their back on all of this.
Have they reached out to you, though? Have they done anything?
Well, this just happened over the weekend, so we'll see what happens today.
Madam Leader?
Tim, why don't you come up with me? We come from a state in Minnesota that is feeling the impact of both the delay of the proper and timely authorization of CHIP, as well as funding for our community health centers, rural health care, and our teaching hospitals. And I've heard directly from our community health services. We're hearing from parents who are on CHIP. It's great to have insurance. Wonderful to have insurance, but what do you do with that insurance card? You need a clinic to go to. Now, Tim represents a rural area part of Minnesota. I represent the urban part of the urban core and suburban areas. And I have to tell you, I've made it very clear, and we have as Democrats, all of us in the House, that we get it, that just having an insurance card, which should have been issued to those families over 100 days ago, does that family no good if there's not a clinic to take your child to for their immunizations or their flu, or for a mother to be able to access a clinic when she's expecting. It's morally wrong to get up and say we've taken care of the problem of CHIP here in the United States for our children when there is pink slips and clinic hours and being cut and clinics being closed, and you know some.
And I would say in your question, my clinics and those providers and healthcare providers, they reject that false choice. They have the capacity to multitask problem solving as well as multitask empathy. And as the leader said, this Sophie's Choice argument is simply not the case at all. And they get that. They realize this. They're fighting over, again, a ridiculous continuing resolution and then trying to place blame somewhere else on our DACA and Dreamers that are there. That's not the case, and they will find out that's not where the American public's at either.
I just may say on that score, when you asked about that, I thought you were asking about the shutdown of government now in terms of the broader sense. In terms of CHIP, we've been hearing for months that the necessity of doing this. Virginia has some drastic needs right now, as do some other states. But it's almost, by February, it's over. We have to pass and by the way, usually we've been able to do this in a very bipartisan way. The very idea that they split this off in the manner they did to go after the Dreamers is really immoral.
Leader Pelosi, you said that you were so close to a deal, and understanding that right now the focus is on the Senate because they've got the bill that's coming to the floor. But are there any talks happening behind the scenes between you and Ryan and the White House and senators, for that matter, to get the longer term fix that you are looking for and to meet the demands that you are looking for? Somebody in your talk has described it as
because I was
crickets
hoping we would stay more focused on the defense, but the defense funding is a very important part of this. For a long time now, we've had meetings of staff of the four leaders and the White House, and we have been making progress toward getting something done. What I think the main obstacle is, if I may, is this. There's a dark cloud hanging over the Capitol, and that dark cloud is the Trump tax scam. That took nearly $2 trillion and added it to the deficit when you take the cost and the interest on the debt. $2 trillion. So therefore, the impact on members on the Republican side voting for more domestic investments is diminished. Because if you just look at what is said in the public domain, that we're going to to subscribe to the full amount in the defense authorization bill, if we were to do that, and if we were to honor the budget agreement, this could be about a $300 billion addition to the deficit. Some of our Republican colleagues in the House don't like domestic spending anyway. And the fact that it will increase the deficit over and above, they gave their all to the tax bill. They gave that their all. And now, even though it increased the deficit to the tune of trillions of dollars, and now they'll be asked to vote for more domestic spending. So I think when they see a CR, the Republicans on the House side, and I don't see this so much in the Senate, but the Republicans in the House should know that they're being asked to, in addition to the increase in the deficit in the tax bill, increase the deficit enormously now. But they should also recognize that the investments that we are asking for are completely bipartisan. Opioids, veterans, and when they come home, veterans, NIH, pensions, all those things, and understand this piece of it, not at infrastructure. Nothing brings more to the Treasury than the education of the American people, early childhood, K through 12, higher education, post-grad, lifetime learning for our workers. Nothing, infrastructure, research and development, education, brings money to the Treasury to reduce the deficit. So if we're going to invest, defense, domestic, let's invest in a way that creates jobs, good paying jobs, a better deal, better pay, better jobs, better pay, better future. And there's a way to do this, to have an omnibus bill that promotes growth, that engenders good paying jobs, bigger paychecks, and again, provides for our national security, which is our first responsibility.
Right, you're telling us, but have you taken the opportunity to deliver that message to Paul Ryan since the shutdown, or are those talks just on
Publicly and privately. No, not since the shutdown, no. No, I haven't seen any of those people around here since the shutdown. But in any event, a shutdown is very serious. When the president said a good shutdown, oxymoron. There's no such thing as a good shutdown. But on the first anniversary of his inauguration, he got what he wanted, a shutdown, a Trump shutdown. And it is made harder to deal with because of the Trump GOP tax scam. Thank you very much. And let me thank our members who have served in the military. It's such a joy and honor to be with them. And we take special pride in Commander, Major General, what is it, Major Sergeant General? What's the full title?
That would be